Okay, so today this is going to be the first of several videos about kind of combining a couple of different sort of architectural sort of questions. So what we're going to do really here is take our time and sort of walk through sort of a full data science deployment. And what we're going to do here is we're going to combine a few different topics that we've talked about across the course. We're going to go through and use web scraping using requests and the New York Times API to get data. We're going to sort of create this in such a way that it's a sustainable scraping option, not a sort of ad hoc pinging those the service requests. And then we're going to sort of take that data, we're going to create a reproducible pipeline. We're going to pickle that pipeline, and pickling essentially just means put it down to file and bring it back later. So we can create our own scoring server so that we can kind of go through and really sort of take a peek at just the full process of this. We're going to hit a lot of different sort of engineering and software development concerns here, which is going to be really exciting to talk about. But in this video, we're going to kind of get things set up so that we can scrape and get data for this endeavor. What we're going to do here is we're going to do some ad hoc scraping first with New York Times to kind of show off the server that will be this endpoint that will be using the New York Times to get sort of key new stories from the world. We're going to use requests, the library that Kenneth Wright's made. This is practically one of the most well-known and best libraries for web scraping in Python, bar none. It's amazing. And we'll be using the API key. You'll see it right here. Don't use that one. That's my API key. We'll talk about how to sort of do this both in two different ways, by supplying that API key directly, and then by bringing this stuff up using a secret key. If you've known or if you've seen in the news, Uber is basically cops to losing millions of different user records and paying a lot of money to a hacker who found it, partially because on their internal GitHub service, somebody had committed the private keys that allowed them access to the database. Never, ever, 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 and here I'll just put this in like a very big text right here. Let's go ahead and put that in 96. Never, ever, ever put your password in source control. Just don't ever do it. Just don't do it. Just don't ever do it. If you ever find a time where you're committing your password to GitHub or to a Git account, stop, nuke the commit, and don't do it. But we may need those passwords to be used by our systems in some way or another. And so what we're going to do is sort of talk about ways to create a secret key, a sort of key that won't be sort of uploaded or committed with GitHub, but will still have access for our servers. That's going to be kind of a really big key lesson here. Part of our concern as software engineers and as data scientists is the architecture of our classes. So what we're going to do is actually create classes that we can import into our scripts versus trying to put everything in one big file or one big notebook. This is what's known as separation of concerns. So in other words, we're going to want to be able to have stuff where we say, this class isn't working, I know where to find this class, versus this class isn't working, okay, let me keep scrolling up to this notebook until I can find it. And so we're going to split our stuff up into the tools that our scripts are going to use, and then the things that our scripts are actually going to do. You'll notice in this presentation that we're not going to use any Jupyter notebooks whatsoever, because while those are great for exploratory work, we're in the engineering part of our sites right now. So we're also going to talk about sort of keeping that repository clean. What this is going to be is basically using a file called .gitignore, and .gitignore tells Git, don't commit or even look at these files, they're not worth looking at. And we're going to use this file judiciously to make sure that the stuff that we upload to GitHub is just the things we need. So no extra sort of support files, nothing like that. Excuse me, coffee break. And finally, at the end, we're going to talk about just sort of creating a script that will go request data from the New York Times and pull it back in. So that's going to be today's this video here. We're going to break this up into 3, maybe 4 different videos depending on what's going on. So what we'll do is we'll switch back over. I'm going to hop over to Sublime. This is going to be kind of where I'm going to work throughout most of this project. And so let's kind of go ahead and create a new file. I'm just going to call this testscraping.py. So what I'll do usually if I'm going to start working with or identifying through a different set of things is I'll kind of create a test file, just sort of play around with my code first, and then sort of formalize that into a useful script. So what I'm going to show off here is essentially the sort of data that we're going to get back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import requests. And I'm going to go ahead and define our endpoints. Endpoint here is just the website that we are going to kind of not change part of it. That's going to be the API for the New York Times is top stories. So that's going to be https api.newyorktimes.com svc top stories v2. And so what we're going to do is we're also going to define a headline that we want. So this headline is going to be the types of stories that we're going to ask for. This top stories API isn't going to give us all of our information at once. It's going to ask for a specific set of headlines. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick opinion. So we'll start off by just looking at the opinion pieces. And what we're going to do is I'm even going to go ahead and put my API key in here. And I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to copy this in. Now, it's okay to leave your password in plain text. You shouldn't do it pretty often. I mean, you really almost never should do it. In this case, it's okay. We're going to talk about different ways to sort of put that into play later on down the line. Obviously, this API key or any password that you put in plain text shouldn't be something that you should only have one password for thing that you are logging into. So do not have one password for everything, because that way if you put into plain text, that's basically equivalent to leaving your keys out for everybody to use. Don't do that. Okay, so cool. So what we'll do here next is we'll use requests. So usually we say that as an object called r, request.get. And what we'll do here is we'll sort of just join together the endpoint and the headline.json. This all comes from the New York Times API docs, which is definitely worth looking at. We are kind of using this this top stories API right here. I've worked through this before, so I can kind of work through my notes here. But if you want some more deeper input, definitely go take a look at that. What we'll do here is we'll format the endpoint and the headline. So this is going to take this headline over here, opinion, and this endpoint HTTPS all the way through to B2, and it's going to join those together into one string. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to add in our parameters. And our parameters are basically going to say, what extra information do we need to pass on to this API? And in this case, we need to pass on the API key under a thing called, under a key called API-key. And then what we're going to do is we'll just print out r.url. So we'll print out what URL we've pinged for information, and we'll print out r.json. And this is going to kind of give us the full set of stuff back. So I've saved it. I'm going to hop back over here to my command line, python test scraping.py. It'll take a second to go. And boom, we got all of our results, which is awesome. This is really, really good. And I'm going to kind of scroll all the way back up here. Notice we have a huge ton of results. Scrolled a little too far there. Okay, so this right here is what our new sort of like URL has been sort of formatted as via requests, right? So here's that URL that we put together, api.newyorktimes.com, all the way over through to opinion.json, and then our one parameter, which is the API key, followed by that value for that API key. And if you're ever having trouble sort of like making this work, my suggestion is to call out that r.url, hop back over here to Chrome, and just kind of pass this in here and see what you get out of it. Now we're going to get a lot of different stuff out of this API, as you can kind of tell here. Now, so one thing that you can do is, so there's a couple different things you can do here. If I were working with an API that had like sort of a very, very strict limit on requests, I would save this immediately to file and sort of do this off of a saved version of it. We are kind of lucky that the New York Times has a little bit of an extra like leeway in terms of how often you can hit the API. So we're just going to kind of ping it a couple of times. So what I'll do here is I'm going to print out the keys of that request. This is what I'll usually typically do is I'll sort of print out the keys of the request of that payload that I get back, and I'll work my way down until I see per result what the sort of stuff I want is. So we'll go ahead and run that again. And I'm not quite sure if you can see this part, but I'm just going to throw this up here. But yeah, so you can see the URL that we've pinged and the keys of that response, which is going to be the number of results we've gotten, when it was last updated, the section, the copyright, the status, and results. And inside of this results key are going to be the actual results that we're looking for. So next, let's print out our JSON results. And my guess here, so typically the way that these sort of results work, and this is a design pattern that's shared across a lot of APIs, but you should always check before you just decide this is the way that it works, is that typically these results are going to be passed in as a list. So it'll be, here are all the things you asked for, here's a list of those things. And so in that case, we can subscript, we can index them by asking for the first one, index 0. So I'll save that. I'll hop back over here and run it again. Okay, so something happened here. So we did not get that out exactly the right way. So let's go ahead and print out just what results looks like. Ooh, and I should probably save this before I hop over there. Save. All right, and let's take a peek. Okay, so this did work this time. So let's see what we've sort of missed in here. When I see something like this, what I'll usually hop over and do is I'll ask for keys again. That sort of error that we saw typically is going to tell us that we thought it was a list and it was not a list. So it is a list. Okay, let's do this. Let's save this as articles and see if we can't get that first entry that way. List attribute has no, my mistake. This is why I sort of always go through and just try one thing at a time, right? Like one motion here. So now inside of here, we have a whole bunch of extra stuff in here. And this entire dictionary is the payload for one article in the opinions of that. So let's do this. Let's go value in articles 0 items. We'll print the key, we'll print the value, and we'll sort of like walk our way through here. In fact, what I'll do even is I'll do this, and I'll throw in a tab break just so we can kind of like get a little bit of like nice visual separation there. So, okay, isn't that nice? So we have a key called section, this is from the opinion, a key called subsection, which is blank sometimes, the title of this article, which is I'm not convinced Franken should quit, the abstract for this article, which is Congress needs a new process for investigating harassment complaints and offenders, the URL that news article is on, who wrote it, the type, when it was updated, when it was created, when it was published. There are also some types of different facets. These are probably tags. So Alabama, these are probably different ways that this article is sent out to people, right? So things that might be related to it that the news site is using to sort of market that piece. So the Me Too movement, sexual harassment, Senate, Roy Moore. Today is Tuesday. The special election for Alabama is currently going on. So we may have Roy Moore in office. We may have Jones in office. Who knows? But anyway, what we're really going to kind of look for here is that we're going to want to create a model that predicts what type of article it is based on the subsection, if it exists, the title, and this abstract. Now, if we were doing this as a sort of like kind of continually growing, as a continually growing sort of model, we might want to do something with this created date, right? And be able to say like, hey, you know, just give me the new articles. Don't give me new stuff. Just don't give me stuff that I haven't seen before. Here, we're not going to worry too much about it, but that would be like a good like step forward for this. So what we really want is just those four things. So let's hop back over to our script. And instead of doing this, let's print out for article in articles. This is going to look at that entire list. Let's print out, let's do this. So again, we're going to use this sort of script first to sort of iterate and try out some ideas, and then we'll go back and we'll sort of like formalize this into a couple of different like design features. So let's print out section /t, again for that nice tab separation, article section. Let's do the same thing, but I'm going to kind of change out a couple of each of these. Next, we'll do subsection. Subsection. Next, we'll sort of come through here and we'll do title. So this will be the title of the piece. Title, and then finally, what we're going to want is the abstract. So this is the little blurb that you'll see at the very bottom. That is kind of, the teaser for the piece. All right, so let's go here and we'll kind of see that. And at the end, we'll just sort of separate each of them out by just a blank line. And so here we go, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different articles that are on here. Opinion, no subsection, stops the manipulation of democracy online. There's no panacea for the harm that propaganda. Wow, that's quite a bit. America's shampoo economy. Coco and Mexico's infatuation with the afterlife. That seems. Is the Democratic Party becoming too democratic? This is a lot of opinions. So great. So we kind of have this this script, right? And if we sort of think through this, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to look through every single type of article that the New York Times API can give us. We're going to want to grab these 4 things for every single article. Then we're going to sort of want to save that as a CSV or kind of keep that ready for us. And then we're going to want to jump out and use that data for modeling. So that's test scraping, right? This is us trying to see, like, how does the API work? How do I get to those things? One really good thing to remember is if you can print it to screen, if you can send it to standard out, then you can do anything else with it. That means that you actually have it in hand, which is really great. So let's talk more engineering, right? We're going to go ahead and we're going to try to separate those concerns. So we're going to have 2 different things here. I'm going to go ahead and create a file here in this main folder. You can kind of see over on this left-hand side the folder directory that we're working with. And I'm going to call this get data, right? This is going to be my file that I run when I want data. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a little something that is a little bit of like Python magic. Well, it's not really Python magic, but it's a good design decision. So if dunder, so dunder stands for double underscore, if dunder name dunder is equal to main, this is a little magic command in Python that says, if I am running this script from the command line, if I'm running the script as the main thing, do this sort of stuff. And if I'm not, if I'm importing this from somewhere, then don't do this sort of stuff. Now, this might be a case if we want to sort of have some extra test cases in here, or if we had a function that we wanted to define up here before that part and import that from somewhere else, we can put that in there. I typically just do it as like a good sort of reminder that this is the thing I'm going to run throughout this. So let's go ahead and we're just going to go and say like print data collection goes here. And we'll look at this and then we'll come back later and we'll actually sort of work this out. Now what we're going to want to do here, right? Import question mark from question mark. We're going to want to put our functions, our methods, our classes that import things here, right? We're going to want to import that from somewhere. But there's no New York Times API Python library. Also, I can't type. There might be, but we're pretty enterprising like data scientists. We're engineers at this point. Let's make our own, and that's going to be sort of our big thing here. So what we'll do is we'll start off by making a new folder in here called utilities. And we're going to put the things that we think are important inside of here. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to save this not inside of my main root directory, but inside of utilities. I'm going to call this scraper.py. Nope, I'm gonna delete that because that is I misspelled that. Let's call that scraper.py, not scraper.yip. That is not going to help us. I'm going to go ahead and delete that file. Okay, and inside of here is going to be the thing that I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and try this out before we get into this. I'm going to call this def importing works. Doesn't take an argument, and it's just going to print hello world. So let's try this, right? Let's go ahead and do from utilities.scraper, right? So here's just like that sklearn dot whatever, we're going to go from utilities.scraper. So look inside of utilities and find scraper. And let's importing works. Let's go ahead and do this, right? Let's just see if we can actually make that work. So I've gone ahead and done that. What this should do is it should look inside of our folder. So within Python, we have a thing called scope. And this is going to be where Python looks for things that we've called for. So we want to find something called importing works. And Python will look in the current file that it's running. It'll look in your home directory. It'll look in your Python path. But we can also tell it places to look. And because within this folder, we have a thing called utilities.scraper, it should sort of make that the primary place that it looks. It'll look inside that folder called utilities. It'll find a file called scraper. It'll import this function called importing works. Notice that we're using snake case here. This even helpfully defines it for us. Thank you, Sublime. And it should just work. Now, you should probably realize at this point that given how often I'm saying this should just work, I've probably set us up to make this not work. So Python get data.py. See? It didn't work. And we can kind of see here, trace back, line 1 of module. It tried to find a module called utilities, and it couldn't. And that's not because we didn't set this up the right way. It's because we made one small error here. And that's because we need to let Python know that utilities is a folder that we want to treat as a module, that we want to treat as a place to import data from. And the way that we do this is we create a small file, and this can be completely empty, called dunder, that's double underscore, init.py. And this lets Python know that the things inside of this folder can be completely empty. We don't have to actually put any information there at all, though there are cases where you might want to put information in there. But this lets Python know that this folder is one that we can import things from. So let's do this again. No module called utilities. There we go. I did not save that file. That would be an important thing to do. What did I do wrong here? Let me do a little bit of Googling around here. Why is that not? Utilities, utilities dot scraper, importing works. Let's see if that goes. There we go. I must have just misspelled it wrong. I just misspelled it or something. Utilities. That's, yep, I forgot an I. Believe me, I can't tell you how many times my great work has been sort of stymied by the fact that I'm bad at spelling. But yeah, so now that we've had that double underscore dunder init.py file, it's gone through there and done this. Now notice that it's done a couple of things here, right? It's created this folder over here once we've run it called double underscore pycache. And that's because there are certain things that we're going to keep importing from that module rather than sort of freshly imported every single time. We might have different things we want to sort of cache for that. And cache just means to temporarily store things. All right, I am going to I'm going to pause this recording for a second so I can grab something to drink, and I'll be right back. Okay, let's get back to it. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw my desktop back on. Awesome. So what we did in the last sort of section here is that we were able to go ahead and successfully import a function we defined here in our utilities.scraper file with the use of this dunder init.py file. And so now that should work. And now we can kind of get set up and start working through here. So we can go ahead and get rid of this. We don't need either of these things. And actually we can kind of get rid of this whole thing that we're importing as well. So what we'll do here for our scraper class is that we're actually going to go ahead and create a class for our work. So I'm going to go ahead and create this new class called class New York Times Scraper. I'm going to make sure that I import from object. And what I'll do here is I'll sort of write a little bit of note to myself. So New York Times Scraper is going to take in, this is just sort of help me sort of contextualize this. It's going to take in as an argument, a list of headlines. Optionally, if no list of headlines is not headlines, that's not it, is provided, use all of them. So the New York Times API is going to look for some list of headlines, some headline that we want to look at. And we're not going to necessarily sort of choose for the end user how they might make use of that. We're going to decide now which headlines they should be. What we want to do with the scraper is we want to be able to say, I want to look at all the different headlines at once, or I want to look at news and politics and world affairs, and I want to look at these sorts of things, and have it sort of do that process of grabbing it, adding something, dumping it to CSV, all for us. And that means that we're going to have to look at multiple things at the same time. This is sort of an argument that we'll see here. This is just sort of a prelude to what we'll be doing here. But let's go to test scraping. Let's go ahead and grab this stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. And we'll go ahead and look at some of the stuff and we'll modify it to make it more useful. We already know that we're going to need requests, so I'm going to import requests in here. This means that inside of my getData.py file, I don't need to put requests because I've got it here in the scraper file already. If I import a file from here, or if I import a class from this place, I'm not going to need to worry about what that looks like. So let's start sort of defining this class. Now, if you remember from our discussion about classes and object-oriented programming, one of the things that a class has is a dunder init function. Notice how there's a dunder init here inside of a class and a dunder init.py file here inside of utilities. There should be certain decisions, certain design patterns that are starting to be a little bit more clear here, right? I'm not a developer for Python. I don't know the actual ins and outs of the programming language fully, but there should be some sort of keywords that are starting to become a little bit more clear to you at this point. And now remember, because it's a method, it's an internal function, it's going to, that first argument is always going to be self, to refer to its own instance of that class. And so let's define a couple of things, right? Well, we know what this endpoint is going to be. This is never going to change. We've got this endpoint here. Headlines, we're going to sort of punt for a second. Now here we kind of run into a question. I'm going to talk about what we should do here for a second. I'm going to go ahead and comment all this out. I'll get back to it later. Should we save this API key here inside of this file? And the answer, in case you didn't see it from before, is no. We should never ever put our password in source control. We should never save it in plain text, right? If we go ahead and put this here inside of our file at this point, we're not going to be able to ever, we should never put this in source control. And there's a couple of reasons why. This API key uniquely identifies us and allocates a certain amount of resources for us as a developer to use. We don't want other people using those resources without us saying so. And also this can allow you to access different parts of an internal system that, if compromised, someone else could do instead. And that's a thing that we really don't want. So we don't want to put this here. So where are we going to put this? Well, there's a couple of options. We could do something like this. So let's go ahead and that's still here in test scraping, so I feel okay getting rid of this. I could do something like this. So if I went ahead and ran this, what would happen is it would ask the user for what that key is. So let's go ahead and import New York Times Scraper over here. Let's save this. And don't forget that first thing we want to do is instantiate that class. So let's go ahead. We'll hop back over to our command line, and we'll run that. And it's going to ask me for my key, and I can say, this is my key. And that'll close out. We can even do something like this, where we say, I'm going to hop back over to my Sublime, hop back over to scraper.py, print self.api key. And we'll do this again. Notice how I don't have to change anything in getData.py because I've sort of separated out the concern of creating that class with using that class. This is a key, and then it's going to print out what I sort of input back into that system. This is a way to make sure that whenever I have that API key, it's not going into source control because it doesn't exist in that script. This is a not great way of doing things. And this is a not great way of doing things because every time we run this script, we're going to have somebody sit at a computer and put that in there. So if we want to automate this and have it sort of run on a schedule, we'd also schedule someone to sit there. Someone might like put in the wrong password. Someone might forget what the password is. It's just not a good way to do it. What we want to do is be able to have a place that we can securely keep that key and have our scraper pick it up without that key also going to source control. Because again, if it's on your local machine should be encrypted. File Vault lets you do that in OS X. There's a well, that sort of didn't show me what I wanted, but there's definitely a way to sort of to encrypt your laptop. Like if it's on your local machine, it's going to be a little bit safer than elsewhere. If you have only one password for every service, that's a good thing to do. But let's sort of take a step back and talk about what we could do here. One thing we could do here is we could put this in a file. And we could have that file somewhere on our machine and have the scraper go ahead and look for that file and put it into the system when it needs to be used. And this has a lot of good things, right? So let me go ahead and do this. So and it's called like a secrets file. And so why is this a good idea? Well, one, it doesn't go up to source control. And this is our source control version control. This is your Git, this is your GitHub, this is Mercurial, this is GitLab, this is anything that is sort of managed in that code. Two, we can have different keys for different situations. So if you imagine a case where we have your local development machine with a key that is specific to you, and then the script goes up to a server somewhere where it's run, we might want to have that server's key be identified differently than you. It might have access to different things. It might be able to have a larger bit rate, and this is great. We don't have to go through and change the script to deal with different circumstances. One can point to a sandbox environment, while the other points to a development environment. So if we have, so a lot of different APIs will have what are known as sandboxes, and these are not places where kids go to play. This is places where developers go to play. So it's basically sort of fake data that lets you practice getting the code correct for the actual development or the actual real API. And this is going to help us sort of develop in one place under one set of controlled circumstances and have the same code work in the actual real world. There's a lot of other ways to do this sort of thing. Another option is to set what's known as an environment variable. Environment variable, or envar. And this is sort of a way, this would be a thing that you sort of provision on your server and on your local machine, and it would allow you to sort of put that even outside of this actual, place. We're not going to go through all that, but that's definitely another option. Here we can go for the simpler way and just sort of create a file that exists in the repo that doesn't get added to source control. And it's got a couple of steps. So let's hop into this. So first things first is we're going to create a new file. And I'm going to save this in my root directory, because that's where that class is being called from. I'm going to call this secrets.json. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an API. I'm going to create a JSON file. So I'll call this API. Notice the red here. Sublime is helpfully letting me know that single quotes in JSON don't work. API, and I'm going to go ahead and put my API. Nope, that's not my API key. I'm going to go ahead and put my API key in here. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is instead of doing this, is I'm going to go ahead and import what that looks like. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to import this library called JSON. It's a built-in library in Python as part of the standard library, and it handles opening and closing JSON files and converting them into Python dictionaries. So what I'll do is I'll create a second method in here. And I'm going to prepend this method with this underscore. So if you're coming from a more object-oriented programming style, if you're coming from a Java world, you may use the idea of public and private options, right? So there's methods that are used internally inside of a class and methods that are available for everyone to use. Python doesn't have that, but it's sort of a wink and a nod and understood that if you prepend your functions with one underscore, that's not really available to be used. Also, it's not designed to be used. Also, is that the certain types of like auto completion, that sort of stuff, will typically skip over things that are prepended with underscore. And let's go ahead and call this load API key. Again, this is going to refer to self because we are working in a class. This is a method. And what we'll do is we'll open up that file in a read-only format. This is a context manager. So context manager. This makes sure that whatever we're opening up is sort of, if there's an error or something, that we don't have to like kind of keep it open throughout the entire thing. It's going to say like, once this is finished running, close our connection to that file. And that's just sort of a good sort of security and safety mechanism. And we'll call this payload, and we'll read in the contents of that file. And then we'll set, we'll return back JSON.loads. Loads is going to look at a full set of JSON and convert it into a dictionary. Payload, and we're going to return back specifically the API part of it. If we take a peek, yep, we call that API. And now how we're going to use this is we'll go over here and we'll just say self dot API key is equal to self dot load. Not self dot init. That's not what I wanted. Load API key. And so we're going to call, as we start up this class, we're going to go through and call up this function that looks for a file, loads it into memory, and does that. And just to make sure this works, let's go ahead and do a little test. We'll see if that works. We've got secrets.json set up here. Let's go ahead and switch over to my terminal. And there it is. There's my API key. So let's we'll do a quick git status. We don't have a git repository in here yet. We'll get init. We'll do a git status. And here's the problem, right? So the problem is, notice what it wants to add. It wants to add secrets.json. So all we've done at this point is just basically say, we're going to put this API key in this other file and then add it to our git repository. And that's not helpful. Now we could be very careful here and go, okay, git add get data, git add utilities, start. We can kind of go through here and sort of work around, sort of manually make sure that we're not doing anything like wrong here. Problem is, people forget things. They do. People forget things all the time. People make mistakes, people fat finger type things. I've accidentally deleted code reviews and code submissions and interview questions, and just I've basically made every single mistake under the sun. And that's why when I'm developing under my own circumstances, do as much as I can to make sure that the simple boneheaded mistakes I'm likely to make, the computer will catch for me. And that's why we're going to make use of this thing known as a .gitignore file. I'm going to make sure that I'm in my sort of New York Times Scraper one, .gitignore. Now this dot in front tells us that it's a secret file. It's one that's not going to be normally viewed. And .gitignore is a file that you put inside of your Git repositories, and you can tell Python things to ignore, like anything that's named that ends in .json, or a file folder called PyCache. And what this will do is Python will, or Git, this is a Git thing, it's not a Python thing. Git will look at that. It will look for any file that ends in .json or any folder called _pycache, and it's going to go through and not ever see them as targets for any sort of repository actions. So let's hop back over here. If I do git status now, I'm going to add .gitignore. I'm going to add getData.py. I'm going to add testscraping.py. I'm going to add utilities. If I changed into utilities and did a git status, it's going to look for everything here in this folder. So this is a big help, right? So we can actually go through. Whenever I upload this to GitHub, it's only going to see test scraping, secrets, get data, and utilities. It's not going to see secrets.json, even though it exists in the actual file. And this means that if you need to pass your code on to somebody else, you can tell them, go ahead and create a secrets.json file that is formatted this way that has your password in there. Or you can pass that file to them securely through a secure channel, not via GitHub, not via Slack. Don't pass secrets through Slack. Let's go ahead and put this up on the big screen, right? I'm going to go ahead and set this to 96. Don't share passwords on Slack. Why should you not share passwords on Slack? Slack stores everything. So you're sending your passwords, your secret keys, to a third-party service that nominally says they're going to protect your data. The best way to make sure your data is protected is not to do that. So don't share passwords on Slack. Share something that encrypts that communication over there and that doesn't save that data on their servers. Okay, let's hop back over here. So we've got that. Gitignore is good. Secrets.json is good. We're going to go ahead and clear out testscraping.py. We don't need it anymore, and it's the last sort of vestige of potentially source control savable API keys. Okay, so let's start working through making this class. So right now we've got this whole set of stuff that says, hey, I've got an endpoint, I've got an API key, I don't need to print that out to screen. Now we need to sort of make sure that we're thinking through those headlines, right? So let's go ahead and change this function a little bit. So here we're going to say, when we start up this class, optionally, you can give us a list of headlines. This is a keyword argument. We have a default for this, so if nothing's provided, we pass in none. So let's do this. If headlines is none, what we'll do here is we'll sort of stop for a second and say, we're going to pass that for a second. We'll come back to that in a second. Otherwise, we're going to set our headlines internal variable to what you passed in. And now for this specific instance of New York Times Scraper, it's going to hold on to that. So what should we do here? Well, I happen to have a list of all the different sort of headlines that exist. And that's home, it's opinion, it's world. I'm just going to sort of type this out real quick. National, politics, upshot. These are all different article categories within the New York Times API, New York region, business, technology. I did mean to save this somewhere and I just didn't get the chance. Science, health, sports, there's a lot of different sections of the New York Times, as you might expect. Movies, theater, Sunday Review. It is Tuesday, so we're probably not going to see a lot in there. Fashion, T magazine, food, travel. It is getting very close to Christmas, so I assume many of you are about to go out and travel somewhere. Magazine, real estate, as opposed to fantasy estate, automobiles, and obituaries, and insider. And then what we'll do is we'll just sort of set this to self.headlines equals default headlines. So if we don't pass in any sort of actual headline, we're going to look at all of them. And how do I know that these all exist? I've taken notes. I've used this API before. You might have to go back and sort of check through that documentation to find it, but that's fine. So now we come to the fun part, right? Let's create. So if we did this, we could kind of go through here and say, all right, let's print out self.headlines and hop into get data. We don't need to change anything there. Just as a sort of check to see what this looks like, Python get data, and it's going to give us it's going to look through all these different stuff. So this is great. Let's actually start scraping things. And what we'll do here is we'll create a new method, as we might always through here. And what we know is we need to do this sort of format. So let's go ahead and I'm going to grab that, and we'll do def scrape data. And what we're going to want to do here is think through a couple of different things. So first, we've got a bunch of different headlines to go through. So we're going to want to do for headline in headlines. And we're going to want to iterate through each of these. Either we're going to get a list of headlines from the user, or we're going to have all of these headlines to go through, all of home through insider. Okay, so that's definitely a thing. Next, what we're going to want to do is sort of let the end user know that we're working. So let's go ahead and say we are scraping currently, not scarping. That is not a word. Let's go ahead and we'll say that we are going to start doing that. Okay, cool, awesome, right? Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure that our script is sort of friendly to that API, right? Most APIs do not like being pinged as much as possible. So we're going to set a little timer inside of our script. And this is basically just going to make sure that, that we're not rate limited right out of the gate. What would happen if we didn't have this time.sleep line here is that we'd try to make every request we could as fast as possible. And servers tend to disagree, or they tend not like it when you are pinging them that fast and that furious. So we're going to go ahead and tell our script to not start immediately. All right, next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to join together this endpoint that we have up here and the name of the headline. So each of these different headlines has a sort of like endpoint. So if we want our home articles, we have to look for home.json. If we want our opinion articles, we have to look for opinion.json. If we want our word article, we have to look for world.json. And so we're just going to join those together. We did this before in testscraper.py. So our full endpoint, that sort of end part that we're actually going to ping for information, is going to be our endpoint plus that headline plus .json. And we use that format, that really nice format string interpolation, to look for the endpoint and headline. Now, why does headline not have a self here? Headline doesn't have a self here because we defined it inside of this point. We do need a self dot there, though, so we want to refer back to our own internal headlines. So before we start going through and making sure this works, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to print out full endpoint. I'm going to save this here, and now I'm going to change out getData.py for a second. So because we're not sort of putting this information inside of dunder init, or inside of that init function, what we need to do is scrape data. So we need to call that method as the user to tell that class to start running this section. So I'll save that file, I'll save this file, I'll hop back over into my command line, I'll run it. Okay, so we definitely, so we did make one mistake, which is we tried to call full endpoint as a function equals, that would help. There we go. And let's go ahead and do this, and we'll sort of watch this sort of tick through, and it's going to, as it goes through every second, it's going to print out. We haven't made any requests yet. All we're doing is sort of formulating those as URLs. So this tells me that things are working out pretty well so far. Okay, so let's get rid of this line. We don't need to put that out anymore. Let's make our request. So r equals request.get. We want to point it at that URL that we've looked at and pass in our parameters of API-key. Again, the actual name of this key is going to depend on what API you're using, so make sure you're checking the docs. Self.API key. How do we know what this API key is? It's because when we started this, when we initiate this class or instantiate this class, we run this line. That line goes through and runs this function, and that goes through, opens up that secret.json, and loads that into memory. And what we can do here now is we go through and sort of save it and print out that information again. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to take this over. I'm going to uncomment this. Notice how like all that work that we just done before in our test file has kind of helped us build out this class. So let's do one last thing. I'm going to change this and just look at home. I don't want to necessarily ping everything in there. And I'll add one thing here, which is just say like we don't need to see all the different articles. I'm just going to break it out to one, just to make sure that it works. So save, swing over to iterm, run this. Scrape data takes one positional argument, but two were given. So we made a mistake in here. We want to throw this in the initialization function. There we go. So when we instantiate that object, we do want that to start. Okay, and there's our first article, right? So it looks like we're able to ping it. We're able to get that information that we want. We can go ahead and change this a little bit because we don't need to print out. Let's see. We don't need to print out what that headline is. That is not important anymore. As I develop, I'll throw a lot of print statements in there and slowly take them away once I'm kind of convinced that things are doing what I want them to do. So we've got this great set of results, and we don't need, but we don't need to print this out to screen, right? This is not helpful for us. What we want to do is sort of save that in some sort of manner, something we can call back to and use. So what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to set a new object up here called data. I'm going to instantiate that to an empty list. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the information that I actually care about from the API. I'm going to create one row or one entry per article. I'm going to add it to this self.data. So for article and articles, instead of doing all of this, let's go ahead and change this a little bit. So what I'll do is I'm going to create an empty, every time I hit a new article, I'm going to create a new dictionary for it. This is going to be my new entry inside of this data.list. And I might want to look for, I could go through and go for section, subsection, title, abstract. Maybe in the future, though, I'm going to want different stuff in here. So let's set up the keys that we want to look through in each article. And here we'll do section, subsection. This is going to be a key for each of our responses. Title and abstract. So I'll iterate through each of these, and I'm going to add that to this results dictionary that I've made up here. Some of this is going to become apparent as to why I'm doing it this way versus another way. I'm going to go through and take that key, add it to this results dictionary, and I'm going to look for that same key here. At the end, I'm going to do this, and I need to break off that anymore. Self.data.append this results. So what I'll do is, every article I see, I'm going to create this new dictionary. I'm going to create a small dictionary that just has the section, the subsection, the title, and the abstract. So every dictionary is going to have 4 entries. I'm going to append that to a list over here that I sort of set up here. As I look at more articles, that list is going to get longer and longer. And then I'll be able to see that. And we can also do something here where we say def print data. And what we'll do here is we'll just print out self.data. So it'll help us see what that looks like. Now, we'll go through here and print out what we see. And now to sort of test that out, we'll go through and run this here. So it's going through Scrape Home, and here's my new section, right? I've gone through, I've looked through a full set of stuff, and I've created a list full of just the things that I want for each of those articles. So that's great, right? Almost. We're almost there. What I really want to do is I want to take that information and I want to save it as a CSV so I can go through and actually kind of keep that for modeling later. So let's do a couple of things. First thing I want to do is I want to go and be able to convert this into a data frame. So if there's any time that I want to save something or that I want like my object to watch something, I'm going to go through here and sort of create an object for it. Now here in as data frame, I'm going to make that object here, but I want a place to save it. So what I'll do is I'll just sort of save this as none. This just sort of kind of carves out a space for that object I'm going to create. In as.dataframe, what I'll do is self.dataframe equals pd.dataframe. Now notice I haven't actually imported pandas, so I'm going to go in here, import that real quick as pd. I'm going to use this from dict method and look at data. And that kind of explains why I did this in this specific way over here, is because I'm looking forward to how I'm going to take that information and transform it into a different format. So, so knowing how you might use pandas or knowing how you might use that data on down the line is going to be really helpful for helping you set up these videos or helping you set up these scrapers. So I'm going to set that in self.dataframe. I'm also in this specific instance going to return this. Actually, no, I don't need to actually return anything here. This is fine. It's just like a one-line little helper method. Anytime I need to turn into a data frame, I can just go and take that data and set it as that. So now let's do this as save CSV, self CSV name, because we're going to want to be able to have the user define like what that CSV name is. If self.dataframe is none, again, I'm not using here, right? Not using equals equals, and that's because is none is a faster operation in Python, and there's a reason for it. Essentially, none is sort of a built-in object, a built-in like thing that it can equate to. And we don't sort of like actually go through and compare bitwise what these things are. We can just say, is it this object that we already know is sort of a built-in object in Python. If we don't have anything in there, let's go ahead and call and convert it into a data frame, whatever that current data is. And then let's just use pandas and turn this into a data frame for us. So here we go, right? We basically had this thing sort of set out. It should go through, we'll iterate through a bunch of different articles. It's going to take those keys and sort of append them to the self.data, which is a list. That list is going to be really, really easily turned into a data frame by this process. And then we can kind of use Panda's built-in CSV converter method to turn this into a CSV for us to use. So cool. One last thing I have to do here is myt.saveCSV. Did I call it save CSV? Yes. I'm going to pass in the name of the CSV, which I'll call results.csv. And let's go ahead and take a peek here. Python get data. We'll let it go ahead and scrape home. It's printed out everything else because we don't need that to. Don't share your password on Slack. Let's go ahead and change this. We don't need to print out that data anymore. But we should have our results.csv. And we'll use a built-in method. We'll use a command line tool, head, to sort of see what that first bit looks like. And here we go, right? Abstract section, subsection title. And we're good. We have this class that goes through, scrapes data for us, and spits it out as a CSV for us. So what we'll do here is one last thing is we check this git init. Oh, yeah. This is going to say, hey, do you want to add in your results.csv? We don't necessarily want to do that. Let's go ahead and change .getIgnore. Don't include any CSV files. You could if you wanted to, but these might get large, or these might not be out of date. So let's just kind of get rid of that for sure. And we'll do that again. And now we had this sort of thing. We have a really slick, small little, we have a really small sort of like script that does this. We have a utilities folder that sort of creates that sort of scraper for us. Let's go back and check sort of our goals for today, right? Our goals were to do some ad hoc scraping from New York Times, use request in that API key. We talked about how to hide that API key. We talked about the overall architecture. So now we have the scraping module where we can import that data and put it into someplace, put it into our script. We keep those modules separate, so we're not worried about if I need to go and change what I'm doing in my script, I can go here to get data. If I need to change what that class actually does, I can come over here to scraper.py. And we sort of helped create this the script in the scraping class. So now, if I wanted to set up something that sort of automatically went through and ran scraper.py, every 30 minutes or something, it's going to do this on its own without my influence. If I add this to GitHub, which I'm going to do right now in front of everybody, so go to DSI East 1. I'm going to hop onto here, git status. I'll add everything in here. I'll commit it. Video step 1. I'm going to hop back over into here. I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to call this NYT scraper, not Scarper. I'm going to make this a private repository. I'm going to create it. I'm going to push this existing repository from my command line. And now if we take a look at what this looks like on GitHub, we've got some really just very simple, just all the stuff that is actually important. Our scraper class, which is going to tell us like how to do this. Again, no API key, so you can't use that. You're going to have to go and get your own API key. It's going to have our done.init file, which is empty. It's going to have our getIgnore, which is going to tell us to ignore .json, PyCache, and start.csv, and our get data scraper, which is really easy. What does our script do right now? It opens up, it looks for home, it scrapes that data, and saves it to results.csv. So the last thing we'll do before we sort of cut off for this video is I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to close that file. I'm going to change this to look at all of these, and I'm going to let this run. So I'm going to go ahead and do git add dot, git commit -m, add all headlines to CSV. Let's go ahead and add that to origin. And let's go ahead and run get data. And it's going to go through, it's going to look at each of these different opinions, it's going to scrape all of them, and it's going to send them out to a CSV. And what we'll do here is we're going to go through here, we'll let this scrape real quick, and just to give you a sneak peek of what this next video is going to be, I'm going to open up IPython, I'm going to open up pandas, and I'm just going to show you what this data frame looks like, what this CSV looks like. And it's going to be really great. So we'll let that finish. This is a pretty fast scraping, right? And you can imagine doing this and having an alarm set up that goes through and every 30 minutes scrapes for new articles, or every half an hour or every hour or two scrapes for new articles. It kind of gives you this sort of built out, expanded set of data. I'm going to open up IPython real quick. I'm going to import pandas as PD. I'll go ahead and do that. PD.read, or let's call this df. df equals PD.read CSV results.csv, df.head, and there's our data frame, right? And we can even do stuff like df section value counts. And we can see we got a whole bunch of different sets of stuff, very few in the Reader Center or Sunday Review, but maybe more in sort of Business Day, obituaries, fashion, style. We can look at the subsection, we can look at the abstract, iloc. That's going to be that part right there. Let's go ahead and look at that first row. Remember, rows before columns. So here we go. We've got this data frame. It's ready to be used for modeling. It's reproducible in that if we needed to run this file over and over and over again, we could do so. If we need to change different things to say like, hey, save this in a different result or append this to a different thing, we could do that. If we needed to change out what this class did, we know exactly where to go. The scraper is inside of a module called scraper.py. Our GitHub repository looks great. It's very clean. We might want to add a README in here, so I'll go ahead and add that off video, and you'll see that as I sort of put that out there. Our concerns are separated, so we know where to look for different things. Our repository is clean. We have sort of modularized things to import, and that API key is nowhere to be found in my GitHub. So you either get a screenshot of video to go and get your own API key, or we'll get your own. That's definitely the better way to do it. So great. We've sort of gotten everything we need to do in this video taken care of. What we're going to do next time is we're going to talk about modeling. And we're going to figure out how to create a modeling pipeline. We're going to add in some more classes for that. We're going to optimize that pipeline using grid search. And we're going to send that model to file. We're going to serialize it using something called a pickle. And that's because we're going to create our own web server in the last video that scores our data as we send it into it, which is going to be really, really cool. Okay, that's that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.